Friends, today's story is incredibly intense. It's about a white girl who falls in love with a black boy and eventually takes him to her parents' house to introduce him. But friends, what happens in that strange house is shocking, and you definitely don't want to miss it. So make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the end of the story. The story begins with a black man walking alone at night. Suddenly, a car starts following him. So he changes direction. Out of nowhere, he's attacked from behind and thrown into the trunk of the car. In the next scene, we meet a couple, Chris and Rose. Chris is feeling nervous because Rose is taking him to her parents' house for the first time. She reassures him, saying her family is very kind and won't mind that he's black, even though she's never dated a black man before. Despite Rose's reassurance, Chris remains uneasy. They pack their bags and head off to Rose's house. During the drive, Chris tries to smoke, but Rose takes his cigarette and throws it out the window, reminding him that smoking is bad for his health. On the way, their car suddenly hits a deer. They stop and call the police. When the police arrive, a white officer asks Chris for his ID, but Rose steps in, angrily confronting the officer. Since Chris is black, the officer discriminates against him by asking for his ID, which makes Rose upset. After the encounter, they continue to Rose's house, where her parents warmly welcome Chris. Rose's father, Dean, gives Chris a tour of the house. During the tour, Chris notices that their housemaid, Georgina, and groundskeeper, Walter, are both black. This makes Chris wonder why they still work there. Dean explains that they were caretakers for Rose's grandparents and stayed on after their passing, becoming part of the family. Chris finds this explanation comforting. Dean then shows Chris his wife Missy's office. Missy, Rose's mother, is a psychiatrist, while Dean himself is a neurosurgeon. Dean proudly shows Chris a photo of his father, who once competed in the Olympics but lost to a black athlete. Dean assures Chris that he doesn't care about race, even mentioning that he would vote for Obama if he could run for a third term. Later, they all sit down for tea. During the conversation, Chris shares that his mother died in a car accident. Noticing Chris's shaky hands, Missy realizes he's struggling with a smoking addiction. She offers to hypnotize him to help him quit, but Chris cleverly avoids the suggestion. Soon after, Rose's brother Jeremy arrives, and they all sit down for dinner. However, Jeremy starts acting strangely towards Chris, challenging him to a fight. Dean quickly scolds Jeremy and puts an end to his behavior. Rose is also upset by everything that happened because her family was acting very strange. However, Chris doesn't take it too seriously. Later that night, Chris can't sleep. He gets up and goes outside to smoke. As soon as he steps out, he sees Walter running straight towards him at full speed, which makes Chris nervous. But suddenly, Walter changes direction and runs off, leaving Chris puzzled. Then, Chris notices Georgina staring at herself in the mirror in a strange and unsettling way. This adds to Chris's discomfort. Chris goes back inside and runs into Missy. She invites him to sit down and starts asking about the night his mother died. Chris doesn't want to talk about it, but Missy keeps spinning a spoon in a cup as she talks to him. Even though Chris doesn't want to, he finds himself answering Missy's questions. It turns out Missy is hypnotizing Chris with the spoon and cup. His body becomes completely paralyzed and he can't move. He finds himself in a dark, empty place, only able to hear Missy's voice, but unable to do anything. Finally, Missy tells Chris to close his eyes and he loses consciousness. The next morning, Chris wakes up in his bed, thinking he just had a bad dream. But later that day, he again sees Georgina looking at herself in the mirror in that same strange way. When Chris talks to Walter, Walter behaves oddly as well, which only deepens Chris's unease. Walter, despite being young, was speaking like an old man. He even asked Chris how his hypnosis session with Missy went. At that moment, Chris realizes that what happened last night wasn't a dream. He was actually hypnotized. Chris immediately talks to Rose, explaining that her mother hypnotized him, which is why he now feels nauseous when he thinks about smoking. In the next scene, there's a party at Rose's house with many wealthy white guests. Chris feels out of place among them, especially when he notices how friendly they are with Walter. The guests start asking Chris strange questions, and some women even comment on his physique, making him uncomfortable. Among the crowd, Chris spots a man who looks similar to him. The man introduces himself as Logan. He's dressed in old-fashioned clothing and is accompanied by a much older white woman, his wife. Chris finds this odd. Later, Chris meets another man named Hudson, further adding to the strange atmosphere. Hudson compliments Chris on his photography and mentions that he once dreamed of becoming a photographer too, but he's blind. After mingling with the guests, Chris heads back to his room. However, as soon as he leaves, the guest's demeanor shifts noticeably. In his room, Chris notices that his phone has been unplugged from the charger, something that's been happening repeatedly. He suspects Georgina is behind it. Shortly after, Georgina apologizes, explaining it was an accident while she was cleaning. Chris forgives her, though he mentions feeling uneasy around so many white people. Georgina tries to reassure him, saying the guests are all very kind, but her smile seems forced, and Chris notices tears welling up in her eyes, which he finds unsettling. Feeling disturbed, Chris calls his friend Rod and shares everything, including how his cigarette addiction was cured through hypnosis. Rod warns Chris to leave immediately, fearing that the people at the house plan to enslave him through hypnosis. However, Chris doesn't take Rod's warning too seriously. Later, Chris returns to the party. The guests begin asking him about the pros and cons of being African American. Instead of answering, Chris asks Logan to respond. Secretly, Chris snaps a photo of Logan, feeling he's seen him somewhere before. However, the flash accidentally goes off. As soon as the flash hits, Logan's demeanor changes dramatically. He lunges at Chris, shouting for him to get out of the house. This incident convinces Chris that something is seriously wrong. Afterward, Logan is taken away for therapy, leaving Chris even more suspicious about what's going on. After the therapy, Logan returns to his calm demeanor, apologizes to everyone, and leaves. Meanwhile, Chris steps outside with Rose for a chat, expressing that he feels uncomfortable and wants to leave. Rose listens and tries to calm him down. Back at the house, an auction is taking place. Shockingly, it's an auction for Chris himself. Hudson wins the bid and purchases Chris. Later, Chris and Rose return to the house after the party has ended and the guests have left. Chris sends the photo of Logan to Rod, who quickly recognizes him, revealing that Logan is actually Andre, a man they both saw at a party before. Rod also mentions that Andre has been missing for the past 6 months. Chris then realizes that Logan is the same man who was kidnapped at the beginning of the movie. Suddenly, Chris's phone dies. Rose enters the room, and Chris tells her they need to leave immediately. While Rose starts packing, Chris opens a closet and discovers a collection of photos. The photos show Rose with various black people, including Logan, Walter, and Georgina. This revelation shocks Chris, as Rose had claimed he was her first black boyfriend. Realizing the truth, Chris rushes downstairs, but Rose's family blocks his path, preventing him from leaving. Chris angrily demands the car keys from Rose, who pretends to search for them nervously. However, it soon becomes clear that Rose had the keys all along, but refused to hand them over. Realizing this, Chris tries to escape, but Missy uses the same hypnotic technique with the cup and spoon, paralyzing him once again. Rose's family then drags Chris's unconscious body away. Meanwhile, Rod becomes increasingly worried when he can't reach Chris and decides to report the situation to a police officer. Rod explains that some white people have hypnotized and possibly kidnapped his friend, but the officer doesn't take him seriously and mocks him. The next day, Chris regains consciousness and finds himself in a room where a TV is playing. On the screen, Rose's grandfather explains that their family has discovered a scientific method to transplant one person's brain into another's body. This process allows rich aging white people to transfer their consciousness into younger bodies, effectively becoming young again. Chris is again shown the same cup and spoon on the TV, which puts him back into a paralyzed state. When he wakes up the next morning, he sees a man on the TV, the same man who won the auction for him. Now it's clear that Rose's family has developed a method to help wealthy white people extend their lives by transferring their minds into younger bodies. The process begins by hypnotizing the young person to strip them of control over their body. Then, Dean, who is a doctor, performs the brain transplant procedure. Dean would transplant the brain of an older person into the body of a younger individual, rendering the young person's mind numb. This same process was done to Logan, Walter, and Georgina, explaining their strange behavior. Now, Hudson's brain was set to be transplanted into Chris's body, which is why Hudson had bought Chris. Chris once again sees the cup and spoon, but this time he's prepared. In the other room, Dean begins the procedure to transplant Hudson's brain. Meanwhile, Jeremy enters Chris's room to unbind him, but Chris takes the opportunity to attack and knock him unconscious. Chris had cleverly stuffed cotton in his ears, preventing him from being hypnotized by the sound of the cup and spoon. As Chris tries to escape, Dean confronts him. Chris grabs a deer antler from the wall and uses it to fatally stab Dean. On his way out, Chris encounters Missy. She attempts to use the cup and spoon again, but Chris breaks them and kills her in self-defense. Upstairs, Rose is oblivious to the chaos, listening to music and looking at photos of her next target on her laptop. Chris seizes the chance to escape, running to the car. However, as he drives away, Georgina unexpectedly runs into the path of the car, causing a collision. Feeling compassionate, Chris decides to help Georgina and puts her in the car. However, it's soon revealed that Georgina and Walter are actually Rose's grandparents, whose brains have been transplanted into these bodies. Georgina regains consciousness and accuses Chris of killing her family before attacking him. In the struggle, the car crashes into a tree, ending Georgina's life. Rose arrives at the scene with a gun, and Walter, still under the influence of the transplant, attacks Chris. In a desperate move, Chris uses the flash on his phone, which brings Walter back to his true self, just like it did with Logan earlier. Walter grabs the gun from Rose, shoots her, and then turns the gun on himself, ending his life. Despite being wounded, Rose is still alive. Chris considers finishing her off, but before he can act, a police car arrives. Fortunately, it's Rod, Chris's friend, who has come to rescue him. Chris leaves with Rod, finally escaping the nightmare. With Rose's entire family now dead, Chris is free from their sinister plans. The movie concludes with Chris driving away, safe at last. So friends, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more stories. See you soon with a new tale. Take care.